Hi there, I'm David Lee Summers, and I am the publisher and editorial director of Hadrosaur Productions. And two of the books I've been very honored to publish are Armageddon's Son by Greg Ballin and the sequel Battle Lines. Greg Ballin is a graduate of Northeastern University, holding bachelor's degrees in marketing and management. He enjoys several outdoor activities such as hiking, archery, and shooting. Greg was an avid MMA fighter, but realized after 50, getting punched hurts a lot. He discovered the safer hobby, which is learning the acoustic guitar. When he's not working his full-time job as a financial analyst or exploring some unknown woodlands, he's crunched over his laptop, putting his warped imagination into words, or penning a column about the outdoors or his latest misadventure avoiding house and yard work. And man, I can tell you about that after the rain we've had this spring. So Greg is the author of Hybrid: The Ethereal War books, which are Armageddon's Son and Battle Lines. And I just thought we would start off with, tell us about the Ethereal War books and where they fit into all of your writing at this point. I know you have other hybrid novels that you've written, and tell us where these fit and how the idea for these particular books came along.
First of all, thank you so much. It's great to talk to you. And thanks for letting me talk about my books and talk about me. Boy, the Ethereal War duology was kind of a way to wrap up the character's journey. After I had finished Force Vengeance, the second in the hybrid series, I really didn't know where to take the character. It's like I had amped him up so much, and it had the ending of the second book was so big. Where do I go?
And we should probably say that the character here is Eric Knight.
Eric Knight, yes, the detective. And one of my biggest fans and collaborators is my son Thomas. And if not for my son, I would not be a writer at all. He encouraged me to start the journey, and he is my biggest critic. He's like, Dad, this really is terrible, you need to rework this. Or if it's good, Dad, this is really good, you're on the right track. So we were going back and forth, and I'd always been fascinated by the whole war of good and evil. And yes, it goes back to Star Trek, believe it or not, the original series. There was that one episode where those stone creatures made Sarek and Abe Lincoln, and they had the good guys versus the bad guys. And they wanted to find out which force was stronger. And I started thinking about this. Well, what would happen if I took the battle of good and evil, somehow got a human alien detective involved in it, and I took the basic theology of what Armageddon was, and I gave him my own bizarre, demented Greg Ballin twist. And that began the journey. And when I sat down, started to do the outline, it just seemed perfect. And the more and more I went into it, the more and more ideas I had for it. And we had talked before about, architect or gardener outlining it. And I had a strict outline for the book. And after about 40 pages, it was gone. And the story was in there, and it had to come out. And I'd sit at the keyboard, and it was like watching a play. And I was just typing out what was happening before me. And I've always wanted to do that story because I wanted to take the biggest concept I could conceive of in theology. It's good and evil. If you are a Christian, that is the constant battle, the constant. There's always something dark looking to get you, and there's this force of light that's there to protect you. Well, what happens if this war is going on around us for real, and people are actually involved in it. And that was the backdrop for both of the books. Armageddon Sun kind of introduces and brings the characters into it through Eric's mentor, Martin Denton. His son gets murdered. He's at Vatican City as a cleric. And that murder investigation drags them into Vatican City, drags them into the theological piece of it. And through that investigation, things evolve, and they start realizing there's a lot more going on here than just a simple grisly murder. There's church politics, there's vampires. There's something in this for everybody. There's aliens, there's vampires, there's demons, there's corruptions, there's dirty politics. And there's actually kind of a love story in there. And then the relationship between a father and a son, how that works. And I took it all because, I said, if I'm going to end this character, I want to go out with a bang. And that was what these two books were.
Right. And so that really brings us to, where did you get the idea for Eric Knight? He's really, the two books here kind of tell us his whole getting involved in the powers of light and dark. And before that, he has, I won't say, less cataclysmic adventures, because there's certainly some pretty intense things you throw Eric Knight into. But why don't you tell us about Eric Knight, what makes him the hybrid, and where you got the idea for this character?
When we first moved we bought our house in Hopedale, Captain Genius here had to go out hiking. And I said, I'm going to go out in this woods and I'm going to just explore. And I figured, well, I kept walking and walking and walking and walking, and it got darker and darker and darker. And I'm like, all right, now it's pitch black. I'm in the middle of the woods, and now I've got to walk out. And I'm trying to find my way out with a little flashlight, and it's getting cold. And it says, I got to occupy my mind. And you start hearing things in the woods at night, and your mind automatically plays tricks on you. And the first hybrid in Eric Knight was, all right, I've got to occupy my mind with something. And the character kind of popped into my head. And the whole book of the first hybrid was basically takes place in my hometown, in Hopedale, in the big mountain, where I got lost. And the actual character, when I originally wrote him, his abilities go back to, an ancient battle on Earth that happened fictitiously 25,000 years ago between two alien species. And Eric Knight has this alien DNA from this Esper race. And he's always been different. He's always been different from people. He's always had these gifts because of his genetics. But at the end of the first book, he realizes what he is and why he is. And he has to become fully alien and embrace that to save his daughter and solve the problem of the first book. And then the second book, Forced Vengeance, is, well, of course, the nasty government. Well, we can't have some unchecked guy running around. We have to control him. And he's dealing with not just himself, but he's dealing with the government, and the government's picking fights with extraterrestrial beings, and that leads to the whole part of Forced Vengeance. But as he progresses and he learns more about himself, his power progresses geometrically. The more he learns about his powers, the stronger he gets. And the great thing I like about Eric Knight is he's insecure. Most people that are powerful are like, he's totally, what I like about the character is that as strong as he is and the abilities that he has, he's scared of it. It terrifies him. So he doesn't want the powers. He wants to be the regular guy, the detective doing his things, but what he can do frightens him. But because he has those abilities, he gets dragged into more and more bigger things.
Right. And I think that, that's one of the things I love about the books is, I think if you suddenly found that you were in possession of these great powers, that you really have no idea what the limit is. It's almost like the old gunfighter thing in the old West. It's like more and bigger and badder people are going to come gunning for you to see if they
Right.
prove that they're the ones that are going to beat you. And I feel like that's what you created in Eric. Is it's like people are the bigger, badder, worse creations are kind of coming after him.
Right. And that was the predicament for the third and the fourth book. After the end of Hybrid, okay, now I've got this guy who's taken down this massive alien mothership orbiting the Earth. He's making F5 tornadoes. He's punching through bedrock. I've written myself into a corner. So how about and again, talking with my counterpart, my 31-year-old son, it's like, well, he's not stronger than this. Well, let's have him, even as powerful he is, let's have him take on something that is even beyond him. And it naturally went into, well, the battle of good and evil. He's not stronger than an archangel. He's not divine. He's not an immortal. What if he has to deal with beings that are so far above him that they even look at him as an insect?
Right.
And when you look at the books, the divinity, they even look at him like, you're just a man. As strong as you are, you're just a man. And he's saying, how do I compete with beings that can move through galaxies in the multiverse as easily as I walk through air? How do you relate to something like that? And that's part of the struggle he's got to deal with these beings and have them treat him almost as an equal. He has to cope with that. And how do you hunt down a rogue demon that's hiding? How do you deal with all that? And part of the fun of the book is that he has to do that. He has to go beyond himself and deal with things that would turn most people's mind to jello, and that's like the concepts of the soul market. That's one of the things. I got more reader email and more IMs about people who read about the soul market. Like, where in the heck did you come up with such a crazy concept?
Uh-huh. I absolutely loved the soul market. I thought that was a great element in the book. Yeah. So I mean, this really leads us into what really is the next question, and the stories about wars between angels and demons, heaven and hell. We've had these around for centuries, really since the Bible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Really since, but as far as, what you might call fiction, since Milton, at least,
Yeah.
and he probably wasn't the first. But what did you do to kind of make this unique and bring a different sort of twist? Obviously, the soul market is kind of one element that's not like part of straight theology, but sort of fits in the kind of stories that are often told here. But what other kinds of approaches did you do to make this different from, heaven and hell coming to do battle on earth?
I gave demon and angel alike a human face. My own assumption, if I was going to do this right, my interpretation was the traits that we have as human beings are mirrored in the traits that we have from those that created us, just not as strong. So light is good, but they're not all good. They work for God. There's a set of the rules they have to play by, but they're just as likely to bend the rules when it suits them as evil is just as likely to break the rules when it suits them. Evil isn't always bad. It's just motivated for a certain end. Good is good in theory, but they're just as likely to stick the knife in your back as we find out in the end of the book as well. They're out for their own agenda. Evil's out for their own agenda. And what matters the most is the battle. The war matters. Nothing else matters but the war. and they don't want to have the big war. They want to have the small war. What I made interesting in this is I gave human attributes to non-human entities because I thought it would help the reader relate to them more. You know, when you're talking to an angel, you know, Michael has that, you know, are you questioning me kind of arrogance. And they're like, well, yeah, I am questioning you. You know, like how, you know, like they're not sure how to deal with a human that's talking back. You're supposed to worship me. No, I mean, I don't worship you because, you know, physically I'm just as strong as you are. You may be immortal, but you know what? I can throw heat too. So Eric has to deal with human flaws that these angels and demons have because they're just like people, only magnified. They can do crazy things, but they have the same motivations that the average person was. And all the politicians in Washington, they either work for the devil or they work for God. They're bought and paid for. The archdiocese, the same thing. They know the war's going on. Everybody who's involved politically is a player at some level. So the war has tentacles everywhere, and the average person is just ignorant of it. So I just figured if I'm going to do this, everybody's going to be involved.
And I think one thing that really grabbed me about it too was that it's, you know, like as an astronomer, you know, one of the great discoveries, of course, is discovering that the Earth isn't really the center of the universe. And one thing I loved in this was the battle of good and evil is not just a battle on Earth in this book. It's a, you know, a universe spanning event that's been happening on planet after planet after planet, and it just keeps going on. And I thought that made, you know, you kind of see that, you know, how this can become a real infinite kind of conflict. You know, it's like, you know, different battles are won and lost, and I love that building of that conflict over time, and, you know, all the different species, you know, of the universe getting involved in it.
And like I said, the concept took a long time to develop. As I was writing it, I had a particular course. And you know what if I took it another step further? What if I went another step further? And it was funny because the first version of these books was a lot different. I went back and, well, I'm going to add the soul market scenes. I'm going to have the whole thing where every universe is a bubble, and if they bump into each other, they connect. And if you have enough power, you can punch through, and that's how Molech brings over those creatures. He steals them from another pocket universe. And the whole concept, which it's obviously it's science. That was the one thing people are like, you know, that's not true. That can't happen. I'm like, right, it's science fiction. I'm not claiming it's true. And it's just, it's a way to explain a multiverse, how things in my warped mind work. And that was, again, a lot of the feedback I got from readers was, you know, hey, you know, what are you smoking to come up with some of this stuff? Because it's really, really out there. And, you know, do you really believe that? It's like, no, I don't. It's science fiction. And I got an email from a priest in Spain, which try getting that.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, well, I thought it was spam. And he had just finished reading Battle Lines.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, all right, this isn't going to be good.
This is
I said, I'm about to get spanked by the archdiocese or something. And it really was a very, you know, thought out letter. So, you know, interesting concept. I'm still not sure where you're going from, or who gave you your catechism. And he's pointing out the flaws in the book, the theological flaws. And I wrote back, dear Father, thank you so much for reading my books. Didn't think a priest would pick this stuff up. Glad you did. Glad you liked it. I'll gladly send you an autographed copy, but just keep in mind, it's not real. And I have, you know, my soul isn't in danger. I don't believe that this is real. This is just something from a really disturbed imagination. Thank you again, Greg Ballin," and sent it off. And I never heard from the guy again.
Yeah, and
So,
I relate to that because I get the emails about my vampires sometimes. It's like, do you believe that the vampires are haunting us in the dark? And it's like, well, not really. But and it's that, yeah, I totally get that these things come out of people, but the thing is the multiverse, might very well be a real, it's a real physical concept, and what form it takes, I don't think anyone quite knows yet.
yeah, but you know what, if somebody reads my books and actually believes, oh my God, this is real, I did my job as a writer. If I can convince you that something that bizarre is actually going on, and I'm some secret agent that's in on all of it, I've done my job as a writer. And I'll take that as a compliment.
And I think getting a priest, to read it and to take it, the ideas that seriously speaks very well to these books. It absolutely does. And, I think as far as the reality, it's like, where you open Armageddon Sun is really just with this absolutely tragic moment where Martin Denton, you've mentioned him, he's an older detective. He sort of is Eric's mentor, is how I see him. And you really throw him in the deep end. You give him any parent's worst nightmare. He has to deal with the death of his son right at the first of the book. And then you throw them in even deeper into this whole ethereal concept. And, at one point when we were chatting in email, you mentioned that Martin was influenced by your dad. And I was wondering, how did your dad inspire this character? I know we all kind of pull from real people oftentimes, and we take the bits and places of people that we know as writers. But what were some of the specific ways that you used your dad and maybe others to inform this character and make him a very realistic, believable character?
Oh boy, I don't want to get weepy in this. I promised myself I wouldn't get emotional, but Martin Denton is my father. That character is James Emil Ballin. My father was the greatest man I've ever known. My best friend and mentor for the 24 years I was blessed to be his son. And God took him too soon for me. When I was 24, I lost my dad and my mom. And I wanted to pay tribute to the man that he was. Eric, the character of Eric Knight, a lot of it is me in my early years. And insecure, kind of brash, I'll lash out with a fist and a sidekick before I think something through. And that's kind of how Eric Knight was in the beginning. And that's how kind of he is. And Martin Denton was the calming influence. He was the compass that always pointed north. And my dad was like that. I mean, my father always had the, you're running into this thing, but let's think this through. Before you do something stupid, let's talk about this. Let's think this through. And Martin Denton is the same way with Eric. He's like, don't run off emotionally. Let's think things through. And that relationship builds through the first and the second book. It goes from, an employer-employee relationship to where Denton is actually working for a firm for the CIA. He recruits Eric and he's his handler in the second book and helps Eric deal with a lot of the problems he's going through in the second book. And then in the third book, where I really made Martin Denton the focus of the character, I wanted to really bring the father and son relationship that the two of them actually had, which mirrors the relationship my father and I actually had. I love my dad to death, and he did forge the man I am today. He filed all those rough, aggressive edges out of me, and I could go to him with anything. and seek his wisdom. And as Eric would go to Martin and say, you know, look at this, and Martin would always be aware to put it in perspective, you know, especially with the soul market scene where, you know, not giving away terms, how do you deal with what he dealt with coming out of that? The, you know, crushing that globe, and, you know, I don't want to give away the whole bunch of the book, but dealing with death again at the second time around. I mean, Martin Denton is there to help him through that. And the one church scene I wrote, where Eric realizes that there is something more that killed Martin Denton's son, when Martin goes, just tell me, did he suffer? And instead of telling the truth, he lies. He's like, you know, I owe him the truth, but I know the truth would hurt him. I'd rather lie and spare his feelings because it won't cost me again. I'm lying in church, but I think God will let this one go. And I take their relationship, where Martin Denton is the father that Eric lost, and Eric is the son that Martin abandoned. They're surrogates for each other. Even though they won't publicly acknowledge that, it's obvious by the fourth book that's the relationship that they have. And it, you know, the character of Martin Denton, the manner, the dry humor, the throwing a dry one-liner when you least expect it. That's my dad. My dad will always diffuse something by looking at me and telling me a one-liner joke out of nowhere. He knew how to turn my button off, and Martin knows how to turn Eric's button off. Rage, boom, no. And that character is everything. The compassion, the sensitivity, the wisdom, and the ability to be a mentor is my dad. That Martin Denton is Jim Ballin. You know, there was no drawing. I made the character exactly the way I remembered my father.
Yeah, and that was the thing, is it really comes across because you can tell that these two characters just love each other. They are, you know, they really do have a father-son relationship, and it was just very believable. And I thought that it's one of many strong parts of the book. And now we've talked about your hybrid series. We know that there are the two books that I've published, which basically people can leap right in at Armageddon Sun. But why don't you tell us about the other hybrid books and where people can get them? And I know you've written some other books as well. So.
Yes. Well, there's the first hybrid, the original, the story that starts it all. That was from LBF. It's now available at Laches Publishing. The second book, also hybrid, Forced Vengeance, is the second book, and we've talked about that. That's also available at Laches Publishing. And it's funny, when Jackie took hybrid Forced Vengeance, the email was, do you think there'll be any problems with me not having hybrid? And I said, well, I had just gotten the rights back to hybrid a week before I got the acceptance from Forced Vengeance. And I said, well, I got the rights back. She goes, oh, well, send it to me. And I sent it over to her, and like 3 days later, she goes, well, I want hybrid too. I want the first book. We're going to publish the first book first and push the second book back. So everything had to change, because they took the first book after the second book, but then went back and edited the first book and produced that one, so they'd be out in order.
Right.
And again, that was a great thing to see those books come to life. And it's special because, you know, like I said, my son encouraged me. I mean, I would write chapters of hybrid, and he'd take the pages to his school. Wow. Hey, what do you think of this? Hey, what do you think of this? And he, oh, you know, my friends like this, then my friends not so much this. And he was 14 at the time, as I was writing the first book. And, you know, when I did the second book, he was, you know, think he was a senior. And we would sit down and we would go get coffee at the Honeydew coffee place, and we'd shoot ideas back and forth. The same thing with, now I'm talking to a young man in his, late 20s about Armageddon Sun and battle lines, and we're discussing plot points, and we're discussing scripts over coffee. And it's a artist to artist relationship, bouncing ideas off each other, and it's a blessing to me to have somebody in my home that's like that. And another great collaboration that he was key on was Lost Sons. And that's a story about an immortal Viking that's been around for about 1700 years. And the story of Duncan Cord, which I haven't done as much with it as I wanted to, because I got pulled away into some mystery projects that I'm working on right now. Sins of the Father, my first mystery novel about drug running up and down the Appalachian Trail. And then I have the follow-up, which is Blood Money, and that's about organ harvesting in Boston City hospitals, tagging the homeless like game and harvesting their organs for concierge medicine. And I've got this one detective who's got to solve all these problems. But through all of that, Lost Sons kind of fell through the cracks. I finished and edited the second one of it, but the character of Duncan Cord, the whole mission of Lost Sons was, what happens to somebody who gets so blinded by vengeance that they become what they fought against? And what was great about Lost Sons was the whole morality in the first and second book. You see two sides of the same coin, two beings that are immortal. One that I'm going to embrace my life and I'm going to become rich and powerful. And you have another one, Duncan Cord, who's like, I've had my life, I've lived, I've loved, and I've lost. I'm just going to, kind of like Kwai Chang Caine, wander the world as a drifter for the rest of my days and kind of lay low and stay out of history. And what happens when these two forces collide, these two immortal beings that have this incredible destructive power, and they finally come to blows in the heart of New York City.
Right.
So it's kind of it's science fiction, but it's also a powerful moral lesson on what can happen to somebody when they're so driven to avenge themselves for wrongs done that they themselves become the villain and they don't even realize it.
Yeah, and I read Lost Sons and just it was just a page turner. It was I just really enjoyed that one as well. So tell me, so science fiction, fantasy, we've been talking about your books, what are you watching right now? What's sort of your favorite series on that you're either streaming or watching over the air right now?
All right, you don't laugh. There's a Ultraman series on Netflix.
Oh.
An anime series.
Uh-huh.
And when I was a kid, there was nothing better than watching a 60-meter guy in a rubber suit with glowing eyes kicking ass on other guys in monster suits. It was, and you had a little specium beam and the whole thing. I loved it as a kid. And I passed that on to my son, and we'd watch that when he was growing up. And when they had the Netflix series, I was like, I didn't watch it. I'm like, no, it's not going to be good. They ruined Godzilla. What are they going to do to Ultraman,
Uh-huh.
But my son started watching because you really got to watch this. It's really compelling. And it picks up where the original 60s series leaves off. None of the other stuff happened. It just, Ultraman leaves at the end of the 60s series, and the Science Patrol is disbanded. And then it picks up like 30 or 40 years later. Hayata has a son, and the son starts exhibiting Ultraman-like abilities. And it just starts from there. and none of the other Ultramen are around, and it just takes it from a different point of view. And it's not a kid show. It is really compelling science fiction. I was blown away. 15 minutes into the first episode, I was like, what? It was amazing.
I am gonna have to check that one out.
I'm telling you, if you're a fan of the original, you've got to see this. It's only like, I think, 7 or 8 episodes, and they're going to do another season of it next year. But it is absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Wow.
And
okay.
Yeah, the other guilty pleasure is Survivor Man Bigfoot.
Yep.
Yeah. Before I get too old, I am going out to Pacific Northwest, and I'm going to find out if this is real or not. That's on my bucket list. I have to go and just see for myself, because you hear all the stories. People can laugh all they want, but I would do it a different way. I wouldn't go out with cameras. I would go out, one guy in the woods with my, I've grown up in the woods. I've grown up hunting, fishing, and tracking. And I watch some of this stuff and I just shake my head. I say, you're not doing this right. When you're going to go into somebody's backyard, you don't, it's like hunting a deer.
Uh-huh.
The successful hunter knows all the habits of its game, and they don't do it right. I'd go out. I just want to see for myself. I want to find a track, something,
right,
just to say I've seen it.
Well, what's the joke I've seen on Facebook? The meme, master of social isolation.
Exactly. Yeah, the master of hide and seek. Exactly. That in any Godzilla movie from the 90s and 2000 era, I can sit down on Netflix and watch over and over and over again. I am the ultimate Godzilla nerd.
Oh yeah, I love those. I love the Gamera films. Have you seen those from the early 2000s?
Yes, those are great.
Yeah, the trilogy. Oh yeah.
Yeah. The Revenge of Virus was crazy.
It was. Now, I have to.
I wasn't so big on Gamera the Invincible, the follow-up to that.
Yeah, that one wasn't as good. But I did. But the trilogy was just fantastic.
It was amazing. Harvesting the mana from the sky and blowing it out his chest. That was wild. A fellow monster geek.
I am a monster geek. And but to finish things off, we talked about Star Trek a little bit here, and now I have to it's time for me to put you on the spot. Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek. Honestly, Star Trek. And I love the original series, but I have to admit, I was rewatching some of the Next Generation with Patrick Stewart and stuff like, and I wasn't a big Picard fan. I think season 1 was a real turnoff for me. Mm-hmm. But I call it Riker got his beard. When Riker grew his beard in and they brought in the Borg, I was hooked.
Yeah.
I mean, they I don't know if they got a new team of writers, but they seemed to get traction the second and third season, and it was some really compelling stuff. And I think, I always love Jim Kirk, and I think for where we were as a society, Star Trek, the original series, was the best Western in space.
Yeah.
You had Captain Kirk was, Marshall, the space version of Marshall Dillon, and Mr. Spock was, his deputy, and they were going in and they were solving all the problems with the big Enterprise and their phaser banks. And I think as we as a society got more complex and, problems were, more solved through peaceable means, Jim Kirk wasn't viable in the 24th century. You needed a Picard, somebody who could handle things more of a cerebrally. So there were 2 different captains for 2 different ages, but my heart is definitely with the original series.
Oh yeah, I love both of them, and you know, it's like, you know, if I'm just gonna pick something randomly to watch, it's like it's almost going to be an episode of either the original series or the Next Generation. You know, I'll put on Deep Space Nine or Voyager 2, but you know, my first go-to is going to be the
Yeah.
first two series, and it's you know, I was the same way with Next Generation. It's like first season, you know, I kind of gave it a chance. I liked it, but it wasn't quite there. But something clicked in the second season, and I know a lot of it was Melinda Snodgrass, who I've gotten to meet. She's lives in Albuquerque. Came on as a script editor in the second season, and it was towards the end of the second season. I think she was hired as script editor, but she wrote the episode. She was first hired to do the episode "Measure of a Man," where Data was put on trial with Bruce Maddox. And that really that was like a big turning of the corner for that series, was kind of right around that, the episodes right around that episode in the second season.
That was compelling.
Mm-hmm.
That was a compelling episode. That was powerful.
Yeah.
That really was. And again, like I said, the later season, the later episodes, they really got traction. And like some of those episodes, you know, like the Borg episode, you know, anytime they had the Borg in for the middle, when they were that force that would be, they were irresistible. That mystery of the Borg really hooked me back into it.
Oh yeah.
And even, you know, John Delancey is Q. What an amazing concept for a character, and he played that so well.
He did. Well, Greg, you know, I think it has been just great sitting here chatting with you. We could go on, I think, for another few hours.
Easily.
But I think we'd probably better call it for this right now. And, you know, maybe we'll have to schedule another chance to chat. And,
I love that. That'd be great.
But I've been having a great time. Thank you so much for talking to me about your novels, about science fiction, geeking out on monster movies.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay, take care now.
Take care.